The battle against the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant continues. Turkey may be about to join the fight. Iran says it wants to, but Saudi Arabia insists it will not let that happen. Is the campaign against ISIL shifting traditional regional alliances? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to Inside Story. I'm Mike Hanna. Two of the Middle East's most important countries are missing from the US-led coalition against the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant. Iran and Turkey have a lot at stake, but have been on the sidelines for different reasons in the fight against ISIL. There are almost 850,000 Syrians who've sought refuge in Turkey, but the government was hesitant to attack ISIL while the group held 49 Turkish nationals hostage. The hostages have since been released, and President Erdogan says Turkey is reassessing its position. But it also has to consider the issue of Kurdish separatism and the dangers of forming an alliance with Kurdish fighters who are already striking at ISIL across the Turkish-Syrian border. This is what President Erdogan has to say. Turkey will do what is necessary in the duty that falls to its share. To say that Turkey will never take a military position is wrong. He continues, will other countries protect our borders? No, we will protect our borders ourselves. While Turkey may be shifting its position, Iran has made its stance clear from the start. It's offered to be part of the coalition against ISIL, but insists that operations inside Syria violate that country's sovereignty. The US says Iran has a role to play against ISIL, but hasn't clarified what this might be. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani says the unquestioned support of opposition forces inside Syria has been a big mistake, arguing that ISIL is a consequence of Western intervention.
The strategic blunders of the West in the Middle East, Central Asia, and the Caucasus have turned these parts of the world into a haven for terrorists and extremists. Military aggression against Afghanistan and Iraq and improper interference in the developments in Syria are clear examples of this erroneous strategic approach in the Middle East.
Well, now let's bring in our guests. Joining us today from Istanbul, Akin Unvar, Assistant Professor of International Relations at Kader Has University. From Tehran, Mohammad Marandi, Professor at Tehran University. And from Jeddah, Khaled Batafi, Senior Columnist at the Saudi Gazette. Welcome to you all. Let's begin with Akin Unvar in Istanbul. Was the issue of hostages a delaying tactic by the Erdogan administration to allow it more time to consider its options on the ISIL issue?
I think it's a very good question, but I mean, at this point, data that we have doesn't really properly, in a solid way, validate that claim. So it's still somewhat in the conspiracy theory zone. But basically, there are those who actually, yes, argue that 49 hostages were kidnapped, in a way deliberately with the knowledge of, Erdogan government. But on the other hand, when you actually look at the facts that, the kidnapping didn't really give Turkey too much strategic or operational benefit over the medium term. So you may argue that, yes, I mean, the kidnapping had, in fact, allowed Erdogan government proper time to basically gauge its approach towards ISIS. But I think at the end of the day, whether your hostages are kidnapped or not, I think what Turkey should do and should have done up until this point are quite clear. One, control the borders and basically prevent the influx of combatants into Turkish territory. And two, basically do some kind of public opinion survey or opinion gauging in terms of what the people think about ISIS. And I think both policies have failed in a way, that Turkey failed to actually take proper precautions with regard to border influx, as well as it couldn't really match the demands of the public or public opinion in Turkey with regard to ISIS. So that's why I think at the end of the day, the hostage issue was just a distraction from bigger commitments. And when in New York, the West, I think, gave proper guarantees or pushed diplomatically the way they should have done in a long, long while, that finally today, when Erdogan returned back to Turkey, he basically said that now the military option is on the table. We may have boots on the ground. And he basically, the exact term he used was, "This is the time we need the army."
Well, these are issues that we're going to pick up on, but let's just jump to the issue of Iran and go to Mohammed Marandi. Iran was very quick to offer its support for the campaign against ISIL. Is this because it sees the group as a threat, or is it part of what some have called the charm offensive that is being conducted by the Rouhani government?
I don't think it has anything to do with any charm offensive. The Iranians have been warning about the rise of extremism for years now, both in Libya as well as in Syria, and as a result of the American occupation of Iraq. Over the last 4 years, the situation in Syria has gradually become more and more extreme, and Western governments failed to acknowledge this, and the Western media was completely silent about it as well. The Iranians felt that their support for the Syrian sovereign government, the internationally recognized government, was the best policy to prevent the expansion of these extremists, and the same is true with the Iraqi central government. And Iran's support for the Kurdish territories, with the consent of the Iraqi central government, was also key to prevent the fall of Erbil, according to the Kurdish leaders. So from the Iranian perspective, this was necessary. The Iranians have been playing, in the opinion of Iranians, a mature role, but the Americans have, again, from the Iranian perspective, over the past few years, created this tragedy.
Well, Khaled Batafi, Saudi Arabia is an original member of the coalition against ISIL. Why is it so opposed to Iranian involvement in this campaign?
You see, Iran is part of the problem, and that's why it is very difficult to see it as part of the solution. Iran was occupying Iraq after America left, and Nouri al-Maliki was their ambassador. And Nouri al-Maliki released 1,500 Qaeda members from Abu Ghraib that were caught by the Americans and Iraqi tribes. And those are the ones who created IS. And it's a wonder that IS and Al-Qaeda never in their history attacked Iranian interest or Iranian borders. And that's why we feel that they are part of the problem, as they are in Syria, in Lebanon, and everywhere. They put their hands in Arab issues. And if that's the case, either they come clean about it and start a new page, or we cannot trust them to be in the operation room. We can cooperate with them, but they cannot be in the operation room.
Well, Mohammed Marandi, your view there of the comment that Iran is part of the problem and not part of the solution?
Well, I don't really take conspiracy theories very seriously. I think we all know where the problem lies. The extremist ideology of ISIL is similar to that of Boko Haram, is similar to that of Al-Shabaab, Ansar al-Sharia in Somalia and Libya, in Afghanistan, the Taliban. And all of these ideologies, all of these groups have their roots really in one country. And that is the problem, the extremism that's being exported from certain countries in this region. The Iranian, of course, opposition to extremist organizations is well documented. And the Iranians have been warning about this. And I think even now the Americans, who are allies of Saudi Arabia and other regional countries, have been saying that their allies have been supporting ISIL. So this is not something that is unknown to the international community. Even the West admits this. But I would like to add one point, and that is that really the root of the problem is, in fact, not bombing or ISIL, and again, or in the case of Syria, in disregarding its sovereignty has been done for years. But it's really dealing with the extremist ideology and those who export that ideology.
Well, Khaled Batafi, I will come to you in a moment, Akin, but I just want to go back to Khaled Batafi on the issue of Turkey's possible involvement. Now, the US has asked Saudi in particular to identify moderate groups, as it terms them, who can be used in the battle on the ground against ISIL. Saudi Arabia says it will do this, it will do whatever is necessary. But from the Saudi perspective, how important would it be to have a more direct Turkish involvement in terms of the wider battle against ISIL on the ground within Syria?
Well, now I'm talking about my opinion, not my government's opinion.
Agreed.
And I believe Turkey should have been involved from the beginning. They have the longest border with Syria and Iraq, and they have a lot at risk here. They have the Kurdish issue, and they are worried that if the Kurds and their enemies among them have their hands on sophisticated weapons, they would be used against Turkey. Also, let us not forget that Daesh have captured many borders, towns and villages along the Turkish line, and that should be a problem for them, and they should be part of the solution. Maybe for internal reasons, for internal politics, they didn't. Maybe they needed more incentives to participate, but I'm happy that they are participating now, and we need them especially for ground troops, because they are the only ones who could help in this regard.
Well, Akin Anvar, let's bring in the issue of Kurdish separatism, the role that a group like the PKK is conducting at the moment. It's already across the border, it is believed, fighting against ISIL, very close to the border, in fact. Now, what is Turkey's position on this? It is in the uncomfortable position of potentially conducting a campaign alongside a group that it still regards as a terrorist organization.
Yes, I mean, a lot of people in Turkey are really confused when news reports come up on the internet, as well as in big newspapers, that, you know, Turkey's only defense against ISIS and ISIL is actually the PKK. That actually it used to be a very taboo term, you know, having PKK or other, you know, YPG in Syria or other Kurdish groups as Turkey's defense. In a lot of ways, it basically shows you how, you know, things can change in the Middle East. I think Turkey's policy on, you know, ISIS versus, you know, Kurds is that, you know, let both of them fight against each other. And, you know, Turkey shouldn't really get involved in that fighting, because naturally, as a geostrategic and geopolitical issue, Kurds are by definition, yes, Turkey's border with ISIS, and first let them fight with ISIS, let PKK fight with ISIS. One, because they have, you know, better and older experience in paramilitary warfare. They are well dug in the mountains of northern Iraq, and they can actually fight reliably in northern Syria. So let, you know, Turkish troops stay behind the border and let Kurds and ISIS deal with each other. And basically, this is a long-term game. I mean, when ISIS is defeated, or if ISIS wins, Turkey still has to think what's going to happen after either side wins. Now, if ISIS wins, then it's going to cause longer-term radicalization effect across Turkey's border and Turkey's own border towns. If the PKK wins, on the other hand, the PKK will be able to tell the Turkish government that the old terms of the Kurdish peace process that has been ongoing since late 2012 they're now over. We want new terms. We have better weaponry, we have better equipment. Our militants are trained in fighting by fighting ISIS. Because we fought ISIS, we now have international legitimacy. And now we're in a much better position to dictate our own terms to the Turkish government.
Is there, Akin, is there perhaps opportunity in this as well for Turkey in terms of resolving issues with a group like the PKK, that instead of seeing it as a potential long-term threat, that there is an opportunity to actually form an alliance with the group to bring them inside the fold, to do what Erdogan has actually said that he does long-term want to do. He wants to resolve the Kurdish issue.
Right. I mean, that's very difficult to sell domestically. I mean, no, populist or popular politician in Turkey can come up and say that, yes, PKK has, joined us in fight against ISIS. That is problematic, one, because still a great number of people in Turkey see ISIS as an essentially, Sunni group that's doing very wrong things, but essentially a part of the Sunni sociology, and that's why they have to be rehabilitated rather than destroyed outright. And when you basically start telling them, Turkey, along with the PKK, our oldest enemy, have got together and we're basically killing, Sunni groups in Iraq and Syria, that's very difficult to sell as far as, electoral concerns are calculated. When you think that Erdogan requires 66% vote in the parliament to basically change the constitution, he needs the votes of conservative and nationalist base. In order to consolidate the votes of nationalist conservative base, it's practically impossible for you to actually join forces with PKK and fight with ISIS.
Well, on that issue of seeking opportunity in what appears to be actually adverse circumstances, I want to go to Khalid Batafi, and then we'll come to you, Mohammed, on this particular issue. The whole question of Iranian involvement in the campaign against ISIS, is there perhaps, just perhaps, the possibility of this being part of a process of reconciliation, particularly between Saudi Arabia and Iran, where the relationship has been deeply fractured for a period of time? But is there an opportunity in this crisis that perhaps people could look at?
Sure. I mean, after the meeting of Prince Saud al-Faisal and Mr. Zarif in New York, it seems that they negotiate a lot of these issues, including the Houthis issue in Yemen, the Hezbollah involvement in Lebanese politics and in Syria, and other issues. And I hope that this is a start of a long conversation, productive conversation between the two regional powers, and especially with Rouhani, I mean, as the head of the state, we hope that with his new politics, things will change to the better. And I'm optimistic about that, but I think there is a lot of old issues that has to be resolved first.
Mohammed Marandi, your view of that, of seeking opportunity in this adverse situation?
I think there are major opportunities. I think a number of Arab countries in the Persian Gulf region recognize the mistake of pushing extreme Wahhabism in the region, not only in Syria, Libya, Iraq, and Yemen, but now also in other regions. And this has become, I think, a threat to their own stability. And I think there's a sharp distinction to be made between the ideology that lies behind ISIL and Sunni Islam. They're very dissimilar, and I think your Western audience has to recognize this, that mainstream Sunni Islam has nothing to do with the extremism that we're seeing right now. So I think this is a very good opportunity for countries in the region to come together and to try to build rapprochement, not just between Iran and Saudi Arabia, but I also think between Saudi Arabia and a number of its northern and southern neighbors.
Yes, well, we heard Khalid Batafi there also make mention, for example, of discussions ranging around the issue of the Houthis in Yemen, of Hezbollah, both Shia-based movements. this approach of actually looking at the wider view rather than the very narrow tunnel vision that one is exercising, is that the kind of approach that could actually be more successful in terms of forming or cementing or repairing alliances between neighbors in the region?
I think that's quite possible if extremist views in different regimes are isolated. The Iranian position on Syria, for example, from the very start was that the Annan plan should be pursued. The Iranians were very concerned from the beginning that the so-called Free Syrian Army was very much involved with extremist organizations, something that the Arab League Observer Mission very early on, which was sent by the Arab League, pointed out that there was a third force shooting both at demonstrators and government forces. The Iranians also believe that in Yemen, the Ansarullah group, as well as the Southernists, which are mostly Sunni, that they form the majority of the Yemeni population, and that if they are a part of the Yemeni government, that this will create stability and in fact isolate extremist Al-Qaeda and ISIL-like groups in Yemen, which are themselves a threat to Saudi Arabia. Also in Iraq, if there is a stable government in the country, I think that secures the northern borders of Saudi Arabia. So there is a possibility that different countries may be moving closer to one another, but I think there are also vested interests in the West that would like to prevent Saudi Arabia and Iran coming together. And you know, in the United States and in Europe, there are very powerful interest groups that would like to see conflict between the two countries.
Well, Akin Unvar, that issue of vested interests actually being focused on preventing the kind of unity that could be possible, to what extent does that apply to Turkey? There has been some disquiet in some Western circles in terms of Turkey's growing power within the region. There has been disquiet among Arab nations, some Arab nations, about Turkey's ongoing support of the Muslim Brotherhood, for example. But is there, once again, in this type of situation where you have got a common enemy clearly identified, we hear here from all you guests that there is no dispute about the nature of the enemy and the threat it poses. Is there the possibility of fighting through the interferences from the interventionists and actually creating a region that is being determined by those who live within it rather than those who have outside influences? Is that a possibility?
I mean, that's a very good question. I think that's kind of like the million-dollar question that a lot of us are trying to answer. Essentially, what you're asking is, can ISIS basically create the new Saddam of 1990-1991? If you remember, during the first Gulf War, there was a big international coalition, a lot of regional powers and powers outside of the region came together to basically address a security threat posed by a very clearly defined enemy, which was Saddam Hussein. And in the aftermath of the Gulf War, you have this, enthusiasm of cooperation that, we came together, we basically defeated Saddam, and then afterwards, the Clinton administration had tried to push for the resolution of the, Arab-Israeli conflict, stating that this, question can only be resolved when, American legitimacy and regional, synergy is at its all-time high. What we're basically asking today is that can ISIS, have the same post-Saddam effect in the region? And I think there are still, concerns outside of ISIS that prevent the happening of this kind of coming together and, resolving mutual problems.
I'm going to have to interrupt you there. Many concerns, many problems remaining, but perhaps the shadow of a possibility of a greater degree of unity in this battle against ISIL. My thanks to our guests, Akin Unvar, Mohammed Marandi, and Khaled Batafi. And thank you for watching. Do please feel free to add your voice to this discussion. You can leave your comments on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. We're also on Twitter. Look for @AJ Inside Story. I'm Mike Hanna from me and all the team. Goodbye for now.